Hello and welcome to It's Not for Nothing, a podcast on untangling the mess of grief, faith, trauma, and hope after the death of a child. We are three Catholic mothers carrying the extraordinary cross of child loss. If you too are grieving a child, we want to provide a safe place for you to come just as you are, while sharing the encouragement that our God is on the move in the wasteland of your grief. You and your suffering are both precious to Him. It's not for nothing. We're so glad you're here. Hello, and welcome back to It's Not for Nothing. We're here with episode 43, Physical Impact of Grief. I'm Elizabeth Leon. I'm the Director of Family Support with Redbird Ministries. And I'm so glad to be here with my colleague, Jessica, returning to the podcast. And Jessica has brought a friend of hers, a friend and a professional colleague of hers, Dr. Ted Mailette. And she's coming from Iowa and he's coming from Montana and I'm in Virginia. So we're all over the place. But we're so glad to be here with you back again for a really important conversation. We've talked so much over the last 42 episodes about our hearts and our emotions, but we really want to focus today on the physical impact of grief and how it can really take a toll on our physical health. But first, Jessica and Dr. Ted, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
We are doing well. I'm kind of excited for October to be over with. Halloween is Hudson's favorite, so it's just always a really heavy month. So once we get through it, it's kind of like a little bit of a breath, but then, holidays are coming up. But still, yeah, October's always kind of heavy. So November brings a fresh start.
I feel that. Yeah, we skip Halloween, like lights
Do
out,
you?
doors closed. Don't do it. I just
Yeah.
decided once my kids were old enough not to trick or treat, I didn't need to feel a grief of an absent trick or treater. And we're that
Yeah.
family on the block that everyone's annoyed at.
And that's okay. You can be that family.
Sure. So, Jessica, will you introduce Dr. Ted for us?
Yes. So I'm so excited for everyone to get to know Dr. Ted Mailette. Ted and I met through his wife, Kayla. She and I have been good friends for over a decade now. I was doing the math. We met in 2014. She's also a child life specialist. So that's how we met. And then she fell in love with Ted. And now I get to reap the benefits of how amazing Ted is. He's a doctor, he's a Christian, he's just wonderful. They've been a very solid friendship to us in our grief, both my husband and I. And so, aside from just the emotional support that we've gotten from them, Ted is wonderful at taking my FaceTime telehealth visits when I need some help with, which I know we'll get into later. But I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate to just how grief really impacts your body afterwards, health, everything. And Ted's just been a really good resource for me because sometimes going to my actual doctor, I don't feel comfortable saying the things. I have a new doctor now. I don't want to really spell out everything that happened in the past. So just to have Ted, Dr. Ted, as not just a friend, but also someone who can give a perspective that's also faith-filled has just been really, really wonderful for me.
Well, welcome, Dr. Ted. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and any experience you might have with grief yourself?
Yeah. Thank you, Jessica, for those kind words. I'm always trying my best. And you guys have been such a great presence in our lives as well. So thank you for that. I met Kayla, as Jessica said, actually, I believe Kayla was trained by Jessica in child life. And we were in Marshall, Wisconsin at the time is where I met her. So I believe going back like 9 years now is when I met my wife. My wife was raised Lutheran. I had been through a variety of churches throughout my life, Catholic, Anglican, Episcopalian. I went to a Jesuit college at Marquette University. I studied biology. I actually have a degree in theology as well. It's something that I enjoy just spending time learning about. But throughout getting to know my wife, we ended up going through as the normal stages of courtship, falling in love, getting married. And then shortly after getting married, planning to start a family. And when we kind of look back on it now, we've come quite a long way, but for the last 3.5 years, we've been trying to have a child. And when we first started to try, it took us about 6 months to get pregnant. And we lost that child at 10 weeks. And I think after that, it took about another year to get pregnant again. And we lost that one at 8 weeks. And it was, as you can imagine, going through that, we found out both of those miscarriages at the ultrasound
Mm.
to look for whether or not it was a viable pregnancy, which was very difficult to be. Again, like kind of what Jessica alluded to, it's you're in a stranger's office. You don't feel like it's a very private area. You don't know the people that well. And they have to deliver that type of news to you twice, which is difficult. But it was interesting after that, as we were going through all of this, my wife and I definitely would say that we has strengthened our faith and really put a lot of time and effort into kind of working on that together because we knew if we didn't, we likely could really struggle as a couple. So we didn't want that to be something that would allow it to tear us apart, but we wanted it to be something that could potentially bring us together. And we tell the story, we told it at our baby shower, Jessica, but it was shortly after our second miscarriage that my wife had a positive pregnancy test. And I was at work. This was our third one. And I didn't know how to feel about it. Obviously, you're excited, but with the history, we were a bit nervous to kind of be excited. And I came home that day and it was raining. And in our backyard, it started to get sunny and there was a rainbow. And the rainbow was probably only 20 feet across, but it was perfectly over some trees of ours.
Mm.
I have a picture of it. And it's beautiful, but we just knew that was God's sign to say, I'm here with you. This rainbow's for you. I know you guys are struggling, but I'm gonna be with you the rest of the way.
Mm.
So we really felt like God's presence was there. We felt like that was God telling us that, no matter what happens going forward, I'll be with you. And it was a couple days later, my wife had another miscarriage with that one. So it was difficult. It was after that, we again had been trying for another year. We were making a decision because we were in Wisconsin at the time, in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, about where do we go when you feel like you're really not growing your family, or you kind of feel like your wheels are turning a little bit. Like, it's like, what's the exact purpose of what's going on in our lives here at this stage? And it was around that time we started to say, like, well, maybe we need something different. Maybe we need to try something different. We started talking about moving. And that's where we looked at Montana and ended up finding a job in Kalispell, Montana, and accepted that job in December of 24. And we had been going through some fertility stuff, some fertility treatments, and got pregnant in March. And we're expecting a boy in 4 or 5 more weeks now. So,
Thank you, Jesus.
yeah.
Ah, that's beautiful. Wow, thank you for sharing that story. I mean, I certainly thought, having never heard it before, and I'm sure many of our listeners will, you see a perfect rainbow in the backyard when you're pregnant, you think this is your rainbow baby. This is the
Hmm.
Lord saying,
Hmm.
like, I'm here, I got it, it's gonna go the way you want.
Hmm.
And just that, when we know this, because it's all over the scriptures, but that reminder that the Lord's presence is not a guarantee of no suffering. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We know our Christian faith is going to include that suffering. So I love your declaration of faith that you knew it meant the Lord was with you. And that didn't mean you got the outcome you wanted.
And I like Romans chapter 5, verse 3 and 4 for that. And it's, for we rejoice in our sufferings because suffering produces, I believe, endurance. Endurance produces character. Character produces hope. And we just have a lot of hope now as we are about to grow our family here. And I would say throughout all of this, if this is what was required for my wife and I to continue to grow closer to God, then we feel very comforted by that.
Amen. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that powerful testimony was not even the reason we asked you to be here. What a glorious way to bless our families and especially the men to hear your vulnerable sharing and your faith. So thank you. Well, let's transition into this conversation we want to have today on the physical impact of grief. And we want to root our conversation in Jeremiah 17:4. Heal me, Lord, and I will be healed. The rest of the verse goes on to say, save me, Lord, and I shall be saved. But just that crying out that we know the Lord is the healer. And as we've already alluded to, his emotional and spiritual healing does not always look the way that we thought it would. Certainly, our physical health is a very important thing to bring not just to the Lord, but also to your doctor, because grief literally impacts our body in a really profound way. Jessica, I know you had shared some ways that your physical health had been impacted through losing Hudson. Maybe you could share a little bit of that with us.
Yeah. So And for any of the listeners who don't know, I lost my 3-year-old son. December will be 2.5 years. So we're not even at that 2.5 year mark. So still really in like the dark thick of it, if it ever lifts. I don't know. Hasn't quite yet. But pretty soon after losing him, there was a big shift in my health. First, it was I lost like 15 pounds because I didn't eat for 3 weeks straight. I was living off Gatorade, which probably any parent of loss can relate to that. You just have no appetite. But then shortly after, I got pregnant with my son, Leo, and had a healthy pregnancy with him. But then after that was really when I noticed, I kind of kept thinking maybe I'm so tired because I'm pregnant, and maybe I'm just a little shorter because I'm pregnant, like short with I'm angry, and obviously weight gain because I'm pregnant, like all these things I could kind of push off. It's like I think because I'm pregnant, insomnia, depression, like it's all got to be pregnancy related. And now Leo is 15 months old. And so about 2 months ago was when I, realized like I haven't lost any of my baby weight, which is not like me. My previous two pregnancies, that wasn't an issue. I'm exhausted. Had one day where I fell asleep on the couch, like watching the kids, as never happened before in my life. Just exhausted, having to have like 2 cups of coffee in the morning, energy drink in the afternoon. Like just these things that I'm like, is this grief? Is this depression? What can I do to help change it? Working out was difficult. Again, I think anyone can relate. Like, even if you get the energy from your grief to like, I'm going to go for a walk. Sometimes that walk is just you crying. And so it's not much of like an endurance. I'm getting a good workout in. It's just, I'm crying. Couldn't really go to the gym because that was a thing Hudson and I used to do together. I'd take him to the little gym daycare. We'd do a mommy and me class together. And so if I ever tried to go to the gym, I would just start crying, thinking, I don't have my little buddy to go pick up. Like, I can't do this. So just all those secondary losses that come with it, even like used to be a great meal planner, that's gone out the window because I don't have, the energy to do it. So just all these things that for 2 years had been really struggling with. And so finally kind of decided about 8 weeks ago, 6 to 8 weeks ago, like something has to change. And that's when I went to TED and we had great conversations of, I'm on an anxiety and depression med. I was put on that from a psychiatrist right away after losing Hudson because we lost him in a really traumatic way. So I remember the psychiatrist saying, consider this like a necessary Band-Aid. And so I did. I was like, okay, I'll figure out what needs to happen a little bit later. And then 2 years later came and decided I really needed something to help me manage life a little bit better. When I spoke with Dr. Ted, like we talked about the med that I was on and how it is linked to weight gain and fatigue. I don't know if there's a better word. So all these things that it was like, okay, maybe we should change something. And I had to get some labs drawn before doing that. And so Ted can't order labs. So he's like, you'll have to go establish with a primary first, and then I can help you from there. And I went to the primary care doctor who doesn't know me. And the first thing they do, they hand you this depression screening, and I'm off the charts. Like, and you're like, when do I tell them why my numbers are so high? Like, should I
Right.
tell them before they give me this test? Or so I just like take it. And then they're obviously like, you scored really high. And then I'm just sobbing and I'm texting his wife, Kayla. And I'm like, I'm not mad at Ted, but this is why I don't want to go to the doctors. Like, I don't want to have to tell,
Yeah.
I don't want to choke out the words that I even have a hard time believing. Like, one, that I lost my son, and two, that now I am depressed. Like, all this stuff I didn't ask for. I don't want this. So it's such a vulnerable place to be telling someone why you're feeling this way. And I think for someone who doesn't know me, it's easy to want to just throw a prescription at you and be like, hopefully that'll help you. Good luck. But Ted and I's conversations have been, what does your spirituality look like? What does like the whole perspective? Like, it's not just a pill. Like, I think we talked about, like, it's taking, if you need a med, that's okay. Like, it's a med and XYZ, and how your relationship with Jesus has to be in that. Like, nothing's going to get better if he's not there. So that's where really Dr. Ted comes in to play with me, of just the encouragement and the reminders and just helping me see the whole picture. So
No, I think you're doing a good job summarizing just a lot of different aspects that play into your overall health. And just to kind of summarize, I think what's interesting about like Western medicine in general, how I was trained, you're very much focused on the physical body,
Mhm.
which is kind of, understanding the biological mechanisms of how the body works and then how medications may influence that particular biology in order to help a certain like pathological process that someone's suffering from.
Mhm.
I've been practicing for about, I did my med school at Madison, Wisconsin, and then I did my training at Mayo Clinic. And I was there for 7 years. I just moved out here to Montana. But the more I've learned about medicine in general, there's a whole realm that's just very difficult for physicians in general to address, which, you can talk about the patient doctor relationship, but it's a very difficult thing to kind of get to a point where you're able to discuss like spirituality and how much of an impact that has on someone's health. And I think it's far greater than we even understand.
Mhm.
So much about life is not just saying, well, you need to eat well, you need to exercise, you need to get good sleep. But so much of it is that emotional and spiritual well-being and where you're at. I mean, what has happened to you up to this point? And that's going to impact you, and how you handle it is going to impact you the rest of your life.
Yeah, that is such an important point. My husband's actually a family physician, and he was introduced through some continuing medical education to Dr. Sarno, who has a couple books out on the mind body connection and healing back pain. And so it's absolutely what we're talking about, that we know as
Hmm.
Catholics, we are whole people. We are not just bodies. We are not just spirits. Like the goal
Hmm.
is health is wholeness and integration of all of our systems. Ralph brings, he said, I'm afraid people are thinking I'm turning into like a woo doctor. Cause, he's really realizing he's in his 60s that like we want to heal. We got to put it all together. I can't just
Yeah.
slap a prescription on this. And that's what people want because that's easier, frankly. That's easier than figuring out a little bit deeper of what's going on, not just in my body, but in the other parts of me as well.
Yeah, very much so. I think one of the most difficult things is to kind of self-reflect on where you're at, how you've gotten to that point, and then taking the necessary steps to kind of work yourself out of it, which is it's all very difficult. Everything's difficult. I always tell people it would be nice to be able to blame some of our problems on some sort of other, entity or other problem in society that's causing a downstream effect that's affecting us. But the truth is that, there are so many things that are in our control, and then there are a lot of things that are not in our control. Losing loved ones, I think, is one of those things where it's not in our control. And I think what's interesting is if you don't have like a religion or some sort of, belief system and something like that happens to you, it's going to be far more, I would say, impactful and more difficult for you to move forward without having that.
In a previous conversation that Ted and I have had, you mentioned how you are bringing up spirituality and religion, Jesus, in your actual clinic, like your practice with your
Mhm.
patients and saying, hey, what does that look like? But do you feel like a lot of doctors, their hands are tied and they can't do that? Or what does that look like?
I think you touched on something earlier, Jessica, which I would kind of reiterate is that when a physician's in a room with someone that they don't know and they may or may not be crying or they don't have such a good relationship with them, they feel like they're in a position where I don't know what to do here. And in a lot of cases, they might say, well, if I write for a medication, then I'm doing something.
Hmm.
So like both parties feel like something's being accomplished by a medication being written.
Hmm.
Now, is that the wrong way to go about things? Not necessarily, but I think it's a piece of the puzzle. I think it's much more than just saying, well, here's this medication, you're going to be fine. There's nothing else to do other than take this medication. And I think with time constraints and as Elizabeth was saying, there is a general conception in society that, a pill will fix my problems.
Mhm.
We live in the United States that has more pills per person than anywhere in the world. Other competing countries is Canada and Great Britain, that are very close to us. But in Western societies in general, and I would also add to that with the absence of religion, because as I believe in 2020 was the first year that church attendance fell below 50%.
Mm.
And people in the United States kind of, again, continue to distance themselves away from God, is that we don't know what exactly to replace our grief and things with or where to look. We feel more isolated, and with social constructs the way they are nowadays of building relationships through social media algorithms and the such, we feel a little bit disconnected, and we don't know exactly how all of that impacts our health. But I would probably say that it's not having a positive impact on our health. Like when you start looking and tying in like all the problems that society is facing, the social constructs that we're placed in, the environmental problems with the food supply, emotionally engagement through mainstream media and social media algorithms that kind of program people to be chronically inflamed with elevated cortisol release, which is very detrimental on our bodies. How do you spend 20 minutes with an individual and say, well, there's a way to look at this that's going to be a little bit different?
Hmm.
But we're programmed to like live this in our culture in this way that kind of is very detrimental, I would say, not only to our physical well-being, but to our emotional and spiritual well-being.
Yeah.
Well, and Jessica alluded to something earlier too that I think is really relevant. When we go to the doctor, we have to tell our story. Like they ask
Mhm.
questions, they want to know, about stressors and anxiety. I think I hadn't really thought about that point that many people stay away because they don't want to have
Mhm.
to answer the questions.
Yeah.
Not only do you have to have a doctor that you believe is going to be compassionate and kind,
Mhm.
hopefully faith based, and ideally have some of this broader mindset that we're discussing of the mind, body, spirit integration,
Yeah.
but you also have to have someone you trust to tell the reality that you're grieving. I remember
Mhm.
Miss Jewel saying in a previous episode that she was having all of these problems and nothing was working. She kept going back to the doctor and she finally said, "Do you think the fact that my son died could have something to do with this?" Yes, it does. No, but it
Mhm.
took her more than 6 months to even put it together.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that people could experience their grief in their physical body and the health impact of that?
I always tell people that, when I kind of go at the end of like a physical, I'll talk about, what we should be doing for our health. And that might include, well, we need to eat well. I like the Mediterranean diet, just clean foods. We need to exercise regularly, get outside and go on walks, stretch out, prioritize sleep. If we don't get good sleep, we're more prone to impulsivity and chronic elevation of stress and anxiety. And then you get into emotional and spiritual well being. But the interesting thing about that is that we are just a product of everything that's ever happened to us. And that is individual, meaning that, if we're all sitting in a room together and an event occurs in front of us, we're all going to have three different reactions to that event. And some of them, might inherently, because of our lived experience, be more detrimental and impactful to our health. So the mental health fallout from grief is very difficult. It breeds a lot of chronic stress, a lot of hopelessness, a lot of isolation. You kind of ruminate on a lot of things as well. And because of that, those types of things release cortisol. And when you have a lot of cortisol being released, your body's under a constant state of inflammation. And the downstream effects of that are pretty brutal.
Mm,
You're more prone to eat more, keep on weight because your cortisol levels are higher. You have more cases of autoimmune diseases because your body kind of attacks itself because it's in a constant state of inflammation,
mm,
which kind of, if you say it's under more inflammation, you're more prone to diabetes, heart disease, neurodegenerative disease processes like Alzheimer's as well. And I think what's interesting is that it's individual for each person, especially in the grieving process. We know that like multiple studies demonstrate that the grief period can elevate the likelihood of having like a myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack or a stroke or heart failure exacerbation. And some studies say that it's increasing that risk by up to 35% in the first 1 to 3 months.
mm,
In some cases, it diminishes over time. In other cases, it doesn't. So some people might hold on to that for, persistently longer periods of time. And the more comorbidities or the more conditions you have, like heart failure, if you're an older individual, the more prone you are to have serious detrimental cardiovascular risk following, the death of someone that's close to you.
mm. What can people do about that? Because we can't not grieve.
Yeah.
And especially, as Jessica indicated, like those early, intense weeks, months, even years of grief, especially related to a traumatic death, as many, many of our families know. You can't avoid, it sounds like you can't avoid that cortisol impact. So, what can we do to mitigate it during a time when we're incapable of doing just about anything? Or how much time do we have later to kind of recover good health after
Yeah.
it?
It's a great question. I wish I had the best answer for you with that one, but yeah, I think so much of it is surrounding yourself with people that love you. Just to kind of back up a little bit, I'm from a family of five. I have five siblings and we married into three. So there was a divorce in our family. And one of our brothers passed when I was 19 years old. And since we had such a big family, everyone kind of rallied around each other. And then 3 weeks later, one of my best friends passed, and him and his sister were the only two siblings they had. And so I just thought about that because she didn't have many people to turn towards too. But, I think I felt like I had great support when that happened in my life. And I think right now we live in a society when we say we're more connected than ever, but we're more disconnected and isolated in a way that's very true. And every, kind of study supports that. So what we need to do to kind of potentially, help ourselves is feel like we're a part of a community, feel like we have a good support group, feel like we have those people in our life that love us, and spending time, good quality of time with those people. Because if we don't, and we don't build out those relationships, especially those people that we feel like are great influences on us and have a great spiritual connection to God, then, we're going to isolate ourselves. And if we isolate ourselves, that emotional distress is going to increase and activate the body system, which is going to, again, be more difficult for us to overcome.
Mm.
I can say whenever people ask me what's been the most helpful in your grief, this is not just a plug for Redbird, because I would have said this even before I was technically employed. I've always said Redbird has been the biggest thing. I found Redbird pretty quickly, like 2 months after losing Hudson. But even in those 2 months, I had explored other online grief support groups, which just did not fit well. I had 3 different therapists who essentially couldn't handle what I was bringing to the table of child loss, also wanting a Christian perspective and the trauma. And it's like I felt so isolated, like you were mentioning, Ted. Like nobody understands what I'm going through and what I need with that, with my faith with God. Like how do I rebuild that? How do I know that that's possible? And so when I found Redbird and just the beautiful faith that all these women had was it was the first time I knew that like I could get back to God. Like I didn't have to stay angry with him. And all these other moms also lost their child, and many of them in traumatic ways. And it's just that instant feeling of, okay, I'm not isolated in this. There are people who do understand my pain.
Mhm. And I can see people further down the grief journey than I am,
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
Mhm.
waving a flag that says, like, this is not the end of your life,
Yes.
even though
Yeah.
it feels like it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's such an interesting conversation too, because, you know, I'm sure there are people listening to us right now that are thinking, but I want you to give me a list of the physical things and do this and do. And what we're saying is, in fact, that you're healing your physical body and your physical health by having these emotional connections. Like that's kind of what I'm hearing you say is that by managing our cortisol and our stress and our overall sense of well being through spirituality and emotional connection and support, we are actually doing our physical body a great deal of good.
I agree 100%. I think, if you look at a holistic approach to a person, an individual, it can't be any one thing. Like I can't just say, well, you just need to exercise and you'll be fine. Well, it's like, well, if you neglect the fact that you're not sleeping well, that you're in a relationship that's not going well, or you just recently suffered something like this, exercise alone isn't going to do it. You need to look at each facet of your life and you need to work on each one of those things. I always tell people you're only as strong as your weakest pillar. Something's going to give in your foundation if you're not building each pillar up. And I think but what you can't do is just say, I'm going to focus on going to the gym, eating well and getting good sleep. But then your spiritual well-being is not in a good spot. Your relationship with God is not in a good spot. Cause I don't think you're going to get the effects of those things, going to the gym and eating well and getting good sleep, that you really want. And if you don't get those things, you're going to feel like the time that you're putting in is wasted. And then you're going to be upset about the downstream effects of that because you can't just focus on one aspect of it. It all has to come together.
Hmm.
But I would say that, in bereavement, in loss, you need to focus on, that community, that spiritual aspect of it. And again, it's going to be different for every person. And how exactly that follows you the rest of your life is going to be different too, because, some people might have a different physiological response than others, but it's your experience. And the best way you can get out of it is to, again, I think it's these things that we're talking about, that we're touching on, is that working with people that are close to you, that you trust, and that I think bereavement groups and the Redbird Ministries and things like that is a fantastic way to kind of build that support network because you're going to need it. You can't be alone in this.
Do you have any specific recommendations for really good self-care in like the first few months? Or when can people start to look at something and realize, like Jessica was saying, it's not just pregnancy, it's not just grief, it's not even just depression. What do I need? How do people know when it's time to take another step?
Yeah, I think if someone feels like they're putting in the effort, but they're not getting anywhere, it's time to, ask others in your life for help. And that might be, that might be your pastor, that might be a group, a bereavement group, that might be a therapist or a physician, a medication. Like Jessica said, there's nothing wrong with using a medication for a period of time. But I think it's so individualistic for each person. But that if that person's feeling like they're not, if anything, they're not trajectory wise, they're not going forward and they're actually going backwards. It's time to get some extra help,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
And I remember one of our phone calls, you two just reminded me to give myself grace. And I think that's really hard. As moms of loss, we're really holding on to the past and what we had and who we were before we lost our child, that I do get frustrated with myself. It's like, why am I not eating salads every lunch like I used to? And I'm not going for a 4 mile run. And it's like, well, because I'm so different now. And there's just, I can't hold on to who I was and what I did before my loss. And so I remember you said, give yourself grace, which I try to do. And another mom from Redbird, which I'll call her KJ, but she knows who she is because I know she'll listen to this. She and I talked about how when loss changes you and you're not meeting the expectations mentally, physically of who you used to be, sometimes we think we're failing ourselves because we always hear run the race well, and we're trying to run the race well. And that for us doesn't always look like a smile and the wind blowing in our hair. Like the way she mentioned it was, for us who lost a child, sometimes running the race well is getting to heaven with bruised and bloody knees and hands. And that is running the race well, that we got there. So, yeah, I think for any mom listening, like just to give yourself all the grace and don't hold on to who you were before. I think maybe Brittany says you aren't who you were before, but you won't be any less than.
Yeah. Yeah. And in so many ways, in these early years after grief, we're figuring out who we are in the world. Like we're new people in the world. And if you were a 2-year-old, because in some ways you are, you wouldn't have certain expectations of yourself.
It's a very difficult thing. I think we all strive and have this idealistic version of ourselves of who we could be. And if we don't live up to that expectation, we have that quiet negative self-talk that's constantly occurring in our bodies. And I think the idea of grace is important because we all are sinners. We all have fallen. We're not going to live up to the expectations we generally set for ourselves. And if we don't, um, your psychological approach to that is either going to activate the body's stress response. And if it does, then again, you're going to have that constant inflammation, the elevated cortisol, the sympathetic nervous activation strains the heart, strains the blood vessels. And it's that perpetual cycle that kind of keeps us in that rut.
Mm.
And if we're able to, openly experience that blessing of grace, I think we can see things a little bit differently. And not to say that we can move on from things, but we can not suffer the severe negative consequences of those types of things on our health.
Mm. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I think that's a good place to wrap up our conversation. And I'm definitely going to have to change the title of the episode to not just like the physical impact of grief, but like the health impact of grief, because perhaps I was being a little narrow in my own approach of forgetting that we can't just look at the physical. It's all connected. People want to know, like, how can I just keep my heart healthy after my child died? Well, it's related to your overall well being and managing that stress and the cortisol and the inflammation. We are whole packages. So our health is as well. A beautiful conversation. Thank you to you both for your vulnerability and sharing your faith in your heart and your expertise and being here. We're so
Thank you,
grateful.
Ted, for giving us
Yeah.
your time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We're not going to let you go without our closing section on It's Not for Nothing, the part of the show where we share a knot that's giving us hope and helping us hold on, or perhaps something that needs a little bit of extra untying or attention. Mine is a knot that I'm holding on to. I had another opportunity this past weekend to give a talk to a bunch of women and share my beautiful baby and share the gift of his life and show his pictures and say his name and just see what the Lord is doing through the life and death of our son, which is, so much more than I ever could have asked or imagined. And doesn't make it okay that he died, but it does remind us that it's not for nothing. And the Lord is bringing a harvest from our suffering. So that's something that's bringing me a lot of peace and joy right now. What about you, Jessica?
I would say I have a knot that needs untying, and that is just trusting God in this next coming year. Eleanor turns 3 on Wednesday, and Hudson died when he was 3. And so there's a lot of feelings of the devil telling me she's not going to make it to 4 because you don't know what it's like to have a child that's 4. Like just these things that I need to I know that that's coming from the devil. I need to trust that Jesus is going to take care of her, that we are going to see her past 3 years, 4 months, 4 days. And just that has been weighing on my heart that I just need to untie it and give it to God and ask him to carry it for me.
What about you, Ted?
Well, for me, like I said, I think everything that my wife and I have gone through the last few years has made me prioritize my relationship. Not to say I didn't have a relationship with God, but it's made me really prioritize that more now than ever. And it's allowed me to be more open about sharing my journey and sharing my faith with my patients. And because of that, I think a lot of people have found benefit, on every kind of, I would say, subjective area of my life has improved as I've continued to give my life over to Christ. Although, as Jessica mentioned, having a bruised and tattered body, making it to the end, I'm thankful for these scars, as I know he will continue to try to do good works through me.
Amen.
And yeah, it's
I had a
beautiful.
friend tell me, it was actually years ago after I went through a really ugly divorce. She told me, every scar that you have makes you look more like Jesus now.
I like that.
Yeah. Thank you, Jesus, for healing us, saving us, and bringing beauty out of places that only feel terrible. Thank you. And thank you to both of you, to Dr. Ted here and Jessica, for your time, your hearts, your expertise. And we're so grateful to have you be a part of this conversation. And thank you to our listeners for being here with us today. We pray this conversation blesses you. Goodbye. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. For more information on Redbird Ministries, visit www.redbird.love. That's LOVE. Or join our free virtual community on the Redbird app. Hope to see you there.